Mike Dell's World number 411. I guess that'd be the information. Anyway, 411 for November 5th, 2025.
I think it's time for Mike Dell's World. There it is.
And yes, there it is. And today I'm going to talk about downtown Traverse City, to be exact. You know, there's people from all over the world that listen to this, but, I was going to make this about November up north. And the more I think about it, I think I just want to make it just about up north, whether November or not. And certainly November downtown Traverse City is kind of cool. In fact, it's a little too cold. We're supposed to have our first snow today. So instead of walking around down there and talking about stuff that's going on currently, I'm going to kind of go back in time and do some more nostalgia. Yeah, I know it's a disease, but we're going to do it anyway. So basically, Traverse City's downtown. It's one of those typical Midwest downtowns, 3 to 5 story buildings. We do have one 10-story building. That's a block off of what I consider downtown. Downtown basically is what I consider downtown is from Pine Street on the west side, down Front Street to the Parkway. Those that are our local will know where the old Holiday Inn used to be and Grandview Parkway. And basically from the open space, which I'll talk about later, all the way up till 8th on Union Street, which goes from north to south. So just some of the stuff that used to be there and some of the stuff that's there now, what it is now, kind of a historic sort of thing, and in no particular order. I sort of wrote down some bullet points here, but I'll probably meander a little bit like I normally do. So here we go. One of the most landmarky buildings downtown, other than, say, the Park Place Hotel, which is the 10-story building on State Street, but on Front Street is probably the currently Fifth Third Bank building. It was originally built in the late 1800s, I believe, as the Traverse City State Bank. It's one of those iconic domed clock towers, and that clock has been rebuilt and remodeled, 2-3 times, but still has kind of that same old look. You've probably seen a building like it with a clock tower on the corner. One of the cool things about this building, and this has been that way, as long as I can remember, but the sidewalk out in front of the bank, all the way around the corner for, probably half a block in 2 different directions, is heated. And I believe it's from the boiler of the bank building, and it's steam. And what's cool about that, or warm about that, is no snow builds up there. So you can imagine what that looks like when it's really snowing. There's steam coming off of it. But that old building, it's still a Fifth Third Bank, and you can still go in. There's a regular lobby, and it's kind of the old style bank lobby. And it's, and the cool thing us kids thought about it back in the 70s was it had one of those revolving doors, and it was one of those that was motorized, so it was constantly moving. I don't even think they have that there. I was just by there about an hour ago, and I forgot to look to see if that revolving door is still there, or the round door. But it may be. It might not. I don't know. But it's probably the tallest building. Well, back then it was the tallest building. I think there's a couple 6-story buildings now on Front Street, or just off of Front Street. But as of back then, it was definitely one of the taller buildings. There was, like I said, there was one other bank building that was 6 stories on the other end of Front Street. And then, of course, again, the Park Place, which was, like I said, a block south of downtown. Ironically, the Park Place had or still does, has a beacon on it like a lighthouse. And it was kind of used for that purpose. Back in the day, it was built in 1930, or at least finished off in 1930. It was something else before that, but it's still a hotel, and it still has that old 1930s building look to it. So it's pretty cool. Anyway, going on down Front Street, we're kind of going west to east. On the south side, just past Union Street, is a building. I forget what the name of the building was, but I remember it as the old True Value hardware store back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Right there on the bottom, it was a 3-story building, so it had offices, I think, on the 2nd floor and apartments up on the 3rd floor, something like that. And that building caught on fire. A lot of fires downtown, but that one caught on fire and just sort of gutted it, and then they revamped it. And I don't really remember what's there right now, but, just regular storefronts, little stores that you would find in a typical downtown. Traverse City is lucky in the fact that the downtown is thriving, so there's not a lot of empty real estate. There's a little construction going on, but it's holding up pretty well for a downtown. I don't go down there all that much anymore, and simply because, it's a lot easier to go to the big box stores outside of town and all that. And I'm sure a lot of people are that way, but, we're also a touristy town, so they get lots of business, and we do go down there. One of the places we go to, I wouldn't say frequently, but 3 times a year, is the City Opera House. And the City Opera House was built in 1890. And back in the day, they had vaudeville shows and all kinds of things going on in the Opera House. Nowadays, they have little mini, smaller concerts. I don't know, Kathy and I went there and saw Tyrus. Tyrus is a comedian / wrestler / Fox News guy, and from the great Greg Gutfeld show. And we saw his tour in there. That was cool. Our local community theater had their gala there. And, of course, we support the local theater, so we went there for the gala. So that was cool. And I've been to a few other concerts there. We saw the Ukulele Orchestra of Great Britain. I know that sounds funny. Look them up on YouTube, though. They are funny and quite talented musicians, considering they're using ukuleles. But that's been restored and kept up, and it's it's just a neat old theater. It's got the balcony. It's got the I guess skyboxes. I don't know what do you call those little outcroppings where 2 or 3 people can sit. It has a few of those, and has the big ivory looking columns in it and everything. So it's like an old opera house. I guess that's the best way to describe it. The Whiting Hotel is also a little further down, or was. I don't believe it's a hotel anymore. I think it's fancy yuppie apartments. But back in the day, yuppie a word anymore? I don't know. But now, back in the day, it was, just a cheap hotel. And I mean, cheap hotel. A lot of down and out people in the 70s and 80s lived in there. It was still kept up pretty nicely, and it was a good place for that purpose. But it's definitely a lot fancier now, if it even exists. Like I said, I heard that they had remodeled it, and it was more of a downtown apartment living, and there's probably nothing cheap about it now. But the good old Whiting Hotel. Across the street on the north side is the old Hannah Lay building. And Perry Hannah was kind of the father of Traverse City in the late 1800s. And he was a lumber baron. He built a really big house. A friend of mine owns that huge house. It's a funeral home now, but I forget what they call it, the Hannah House, but it's a funeral home, the Reynolds Yankoff Funeral Home, and it's they've kept it restored, and it's been updated a few times, but still a very cool old Victorian era house. But the main store, the big store, it was a 3-story, almost block long department store. They had a department for men and a department for women and a department for sports and a department for this and that and the other thing, all under one big roof. And that lasted, I want to say, it was before my time when they closed down, but then it became, the top 2 floors became office suites, and there was a bank, offices in there and all this. And then the bottom row of spaces were, just regular storefronts. I think there was 3 or 4 of them. The thing I remember, there was a couple of stores in that building on the ground floor, Bilmar Sports, and they're long gone. And Montgomery Ward's catalog store was there, and they had a few appliances or something, and then they just take and deliver catalog orders there, kind of like Sears before they had the big store in Traverse City at the mall. Sears also had a store. I don't think it was on Front Street. It might have been, their catalog store, but not the same as, a big Sears store that they would have at a mall or a standalone out of town. But then there was another department store, quite smaller, but Milliken's. And Milliken's was, I think they might have had 2 or 3 stores in smaller towns around northern and central Michigan. I think one of their stores was in Clare, and I think they had one in Cadillac, so that would be south of here. But Milliken's been around for, I don't know, since probably the 1800s as well, or early 1900s, and they got bought out by another chain and closed down sometime in the 90s. But the Milliken family, our governor from, I want to say 1969 to almost 1980, Bill Milliken, he was part of that family. And really the only thing I remember about it is my grandmother and my mom would take us kids when we were really little, 4, 5, 6 years old, something like that, shopping, and they would shop at Milliken's. The women would get all their clothes and stuff there, and they had kids department. So we got some of our clothes there. And then we always got to go to the tea room for lunch. And it was kind of up on the second floor and like a balcony overlooking the store. And the thing I remember about that, it's the weird things you remember when you're a kid, but I remember the hot roast beef sandwich at the Milliken's tea room. It was, well, as I remember it, really good, but, There was another restaurant downtown, and I don't remember exactly what building it was in, called Stacy's. And this lady ran that place, and the unique part of that was 2 things. No politics. So you could sit there and talk and get all your buddies around and drink coffee and, whatever. All you wanted, but no politics. And the other thing was you had to ring yourself out on the cash register. She trusted everybody, and you just go up and, run the cash register yourself. That saved her from getting a cashier. Yeah, there we go. Jeez. I'm kind of just theater of the mind going on here. So what do they call it? A mind dump? Another interesting thing about downtown Traverse City is we had 2 theaters, and they were basically mirror images of each other, one block apart, one on the eastern block between Union, or western block between Union and Park Street, and then the State Theater, which was it was about the same spot on the block, but one block to the east between Union and or maybe it was Michigan was between Union and Cass, and then between Cass and Park was the State Theater. The Michigan Theater had a vertical sign because there's more letters in Michigan, but it was one of those old style 30s, 40s vintage theaters, with the red marble looking stuff. I don't know what it was, but red blocks, really large blocks, and the neon and the flashy lights and the overhang and a little pull off on the street so you could get dropped off right under the overhang, and had the marquee kind of sticking out into the street. And they said they looked identical except for the State had a vertical sign or a horizontal sign, and the Michigan had a vertical sign. But again, they were mirror images. Underneath the Michigan Theater was a roller skating rink called the Fun Factory. And that was, in the 70s and 80s. And it was a small, indoor roller rink, low ceilings. But, back in the 70s, that was cool. And I remember every time Disco Duck would come up when we were skating, you'd run around, squat down on your skates. And I don't know, maybe I'm aging myself here, but that was quite fun. Rumor has it that is intact still. It's been closed for probably 30 years plus, but from what I understand, the floor is still there. The wooden floor from the skating rink is still there, and the DJ booth is still there. They were using it for like wedding receptions and stuff for a while, but from what I understand, it's still there. Of course, the Michigan Theater is no longer. That got remodeled into kind of a little mall sort of space. 2 stories of little shops and whatnot called Front Row Center. And I think it's been changed. One of the name's been changed, but it's still there. There's still a few things in there. It's kind of cool. The State Theater is still intact. Michael Moore, that guy. He had a film festival here in Traverse City for many years. That has since gone defunct. But that film festival organization owned the State Theater. Now I think they're their own thing, but it's a nonprofit. And they play old movies in there, and they play live events, where they stream live events in there. And it's a cool old theater. It still looks like the 1930s vintage theater with the marquee and the flashy lights and the posters on the outside. And, so that's quite a time capsule there. They still have the ticket booth outside on the sidewalk and all that. And, like I said, it's pretty cool. But let's see. I've got my notes here. Let's see. Horizon Books. Horizon Books wasn't that big a deal when I was a kid. It was a small, one storefront little bookshop, and, little family-owned, no big deal bookshop. And they were on the south side of Front Street, and across the street from them, or nearly across the street, was the J.C. Penney building, and that was another, full-blown department store. It had a basement floor, a main floor, and an upper floor, so it was a rather large space. And of course, J.C. Penney pulled out of downtown and moved out to the mall. What we affectionately call the new mall. Actually, they're still there for now. although Macy's moved out of the mall, and Sears is long gone and all that. But anywho, the bookshop, which everybody thought they were nuts, and this was probably 25, 30 years ago at least, they moved across the street to the JCPenney building. And in the downstairs, they made a little coffee shop cafe sort of thing, and they'd have live music and book readings and book signings down there. And then, they just had the run of this huge building, and it's still one of the best bookstores around. It's really quite cool. And they were going to close it down not too long ago because the owners wanted to retire, and I think the employees took it over or helped the owners, keep it running so that they could sort of retire. I don't know the full story on that, but Horizon Books is still there, and it's kind of right next to the State Theater, so there's kind of that vibe going on down there of the old 30s, 40s thing. Something with some family connection. On the south side of Front Street, there's a building, and it's a very, not very, but it's a unique looking building. It's got an upstairs and a downstairs, so you have to go up a few stairs to get to the upper level one, and then you kind of go down below the street level to the thing below. Well, my grandfather, on my dad's side, had a restaurant there, Dell's Restaurant. And that was in the upper part with the big, and there's these big windows with, rounded tops on it, and the building still looks the same. There's been many things since that. This was in the 40s that Grandpa had that restaurant. And, one of the funny things about my grandpa is he didn't believe you should put ketchup on anything. And, I don't like ketchup on anything but pasties. That's a whole nother story. But one time somebody came in there and ordered a steak and then wanted ketchup. My grandpa threw them out. But like I said, that was in the 40s, I think shortly after World War II, that he had that restaurant. I don't know how long it lasted, and I really didn't get a whole lot of history on it before he died or Grandma died. But that was our family's claim to fame on Front Street there. Again, I mentioned Stacy's. That was up the street a little ways. It was kind of a coffee breakfast thing. There was another place called the Bean Pot, and that was kind of at the end of Front Street on the east side. And it was, a corner location. I think it was on Park Street, maybe, or, might not even been Park Street, but it was on that block. And I just remember the Bean Pot having everything that they sold was just really good. They had coney dogs. They had, of course, bean soup was kind of their claim to fame, but everything they had in there was just awesome. This was in the 80s, and of course that's long gone. I think it's a real estate office now, but it was definitely one of those places that was quite cool, I thought. Anyway, I'm probably boring the hell out of you, but I'm enjoying it. So I guess that's what matters here, and if I'm enjoying it, you might be enjoying it. And actually not technically in downtown, but damn close, was the Paul Bunyan. Well, I guess it's part of that stretch. The Paul Bunyan building. And probably even the locals are going, what are you talking about, the Paul Bunyan building? That's where WTCM radio is. And back in the day, that was AM 1400. And then they switched to AM 580, and they have an FM station, 103.5 country station. And that was all run out of this little, looks pretty little, but it's a lot bigger on the inside when you go in. But this little building, everybody affectionately called it the Paul Bunyan building, or at least the guys on the radio did. And the people that owned that started that back in the day. The Biederman the Biedermans. In fact, Les Biederman, the old man, affectionately call him the old man, he was a hangout at Stacy's restaurant all the time, and he was the reason for the no politics rule that I forget what her name was that ran Stacy's. Her name wasn't Stacy. She was a Hungarian lady and really a spitfire. If you look up on YouTube, there is, maybe I'll find it and I'll send you the video, or I'll put the video in the show notes over at MikeDell.com of this lady at Stacy's restaurant here in Traverse City. But anyway, the Biedermans, his son is now is running it. Actually, I think somebody else is running it now, and the son retired recently, but it's still family owned. It's a locally owned radio station. It's not a big conglomerate, but they've picked up other stations. It's called Midwest Broadcasting is the name of the company now, and they built a huge 3-story big office building kind of right next door to their building called Radio Center. And a lot of their other stations are on the top floor of Radio Center, although WTCM, AM, FM, and WKLT, the rock station, is also in the Paul Bunyan building. And then they have an oldies station, and I think a jazz station, and a sports station, and a classic country station, and a few other things that are up there at the top floor of the Radio Center building. And then the bottom floors are offices that they rent out and storefronts on the bottom floor and all that. And kind of kitty corner across the road from Radio Center at Park in front used to be Murray's Boats and Motors, and it was right on the river. The river, Boardman River, kind of runs behind the buildings there on the north side of Front Street. And there was a marina there called Murray's Boats and Motors, and they sold, I think, Mercury outboards and boats and all that stuff. Both my dad and my uncle worked there as mechanics back in the day, way back in the day. And that got torn down, and another radio guy built another big building there, another 3-story building, and I think he called that Broadcast Center. But then before it was completely finished, he ran out of money, and somebody else bought it out, and I don't know what the building's called now, but on the bottom floor is a rather large credit union office, or credit union branch. And then there's apartments and whatnot on the upper floors. But kind of interesting that 2 radio titans, and I use that term in lowercase, in the area, built those 2 big buildings downtown. And I'm trying to think of what the guy's name was that he had the other big radio station, WCCW. No, that wasn't it. WLDR. There we go. That's what it was. He had that one and a few others and all that. But so that was Front Street. Let's see. I've been going 28 minutes. Maybe tomorrow I'll pick up on Union Street. So the other part of downtown. And part of Union Street's called Old Town for whatever reason. But yeah, I think I'm going to call this one a podcast, and I'll probably just hit stop and record part 2 here so I can take a day off. So stand by for tomorrow. I'll have the Union Street part of downtown Traverse City.